If you agree that some people are more than what they seem, like and subscribe. This is one of those stories where the world's assumptions are shattered, and what no one believed turns out to be the very thing that saves them. They thought she was just a medic, and for the longest time, Sergeant Lily Reynolds was fine with that. In fact, she wore it like a badge of honor. Not the medic part, the just part. She had been trained for more than just bandaging cuts or cleaning wounds. She had been taught to assess, to respond, to think, and, above all, to act in ways that other soldiers didn't even consider. But none of that mattered. She was a medic, end of story. It wasn't like anyone had to remind her. She'd spent years working in the shadows of others' glory, standing behind soldiers who carried the real weight, who wore the medals, who had the titles. She wasn't there for the fame or the recognition. Her job was to save lives, not to seek praise. And that's exactly what she did, quietly and efficiently, when no one was looking. But on that day, things were different. It started like any other training day at Fort Tannenhall, a military base where soldiers trained for all manner of combat scenarios. Lily, only in her late 20s but having served longer than many of her peers, knew how the drill went. Wake up early, get into position, and execute the mission. Simple. It wasn't the first time she had worked a simulation, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. There was something in the air, a tension that hung heavier than usual, and it wasn't just because of the high stakes of the exercise. It was the people around her. The officers and soldiers all seemed to have a common perception of her. A medic, nothing more. The whispers started early, even before the drill began. Lieutenant Jensen, an officer who had joined the base not too long ago, couldn't even be bothered to look at her when he passed by. "You sure you're going to be able to handle this?" he asked with a smirk, looking down at the first aid kit strapped to her waist. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried just enough for the few soldiers nearby to overhear. "I mean, last I checked, you don't need much more than a bandage for a broken leg, right?" A few of the younger soldiers snickered under their breath. Others just kept their eyes focused straight ahead. It wasn't like they thought she was incapable. They just didn't see her as necessary in the grand scheme of things. They saw her as the person they'd turn to only when they had no other option, someone who patched wounds and gave out pills for headaches. But they would soon learn that underestimating Lily Reynolds was a mistake no one would forget. The simulation, meant to mirror a high-intensity mission gone wrong, kicked off. There were loud explosions, shouts, and the sound of simulated gunfire ringing through the air. Everything was controlled, except the chaos. It wasn't long before the first casualties hit the ground. The injured were scattered all over the battlefield, their mock wounds painted in vivid detail. Lily had done this 100 times before. Locate the wounded, provide aid, direct others, and keep a level head. It was supposed to be routine. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the officers, Captain Lawson, went down. It was supposed to be part of the drill, but when his radio went silent and he didn't move, the reality of the situation set in. No one had expected it to happen, but Captain Lawson was incapacitated, and there was no backup plan in place for what came next. The soldiers froze. They hesitated, unsure whether it was a mistake or an accident. Moments passed like hours, and for a split second, the air became thick with uncertainty. Lily didn't wait. Her instincts kicked in. She sprinted toward the scene, her boots slamming against the dirt and gravel, pushing through the chaos. She reached Lawson's side and quickly assessed the situation. He was hurt, seriously. His leg was pinned under debris, and he had a deep gash across his forehead. His breathing was labored. She didn't have time to panic, time to doubt. Her training had prepared her for this. While the soldiers around her hesitated, Lily moved with purpose. She called for assistance, but the soldiers were still too distracted by the unfolding scenario. They had trained for combat, for gunfire, for the thrill of battle. But none of them had trained for what happened next. They didn't know how to handle the sudden urgency of the situation. And worse, none of them expected someone who wasn't in the line of command to take charge. Lily was a medic. She didn't need permission. She didn't need validation. She just acted. With no time to waste, she performed an emergency procedure, stabilizing Lawson's breathing, applying a makeshift tourniquet, and preparing him for evacuation. By the time the backup team arrived, Lily had already done what they couldn't. She had taken command of the situation, leading the evacuation with calm efficiency. She had treated more than just Lawson's wounds. She had treated the panic that had seized the soldiers around her. And the moment she emerged from the battlefield with Lawson in tow, it wasn't just the others who realized something. It was Lily herself. She wasn't just a medic. She wasn't just anything. As they stood there in the aftermath of the drill, the soldiers around her exchanged looks, their previous assumptions shattering. Some nodded respectfully. Others offered quiet apologies. They had seen her in action, and they understood, finally, that Lily Reynolds was more than what they had pegged her for. But Lily? She didn't need their acknowledgement. She had never needed it. Because for her, this wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about doing what needed to be done. And that's exactly what she did. No fanfare. No praise. Just the quiet strength of someone who had always known exactly who they were, even if no one else did. In that moment, Lily Reynolds wasn't just the medic. They finally saw her for what she truly was. The one who saves lives when no one else can. The days after the drill felt like a blur to Sergeant Lily Reynolds. She hadn't asked for the attention, but it followed her anyway. The whispers that had once been about her capability now turned to silent respect. It wasn't that she craved recognition. It was that she had proven her worth in the only way that mattered, by doing her job without hesitation, by saving lives when others froze. But that wasn't the end of the story. The real test was yet to come. It was the day of the live exercise operation, one of the most challenging scenarios the base ever ran. The mission was designed to be a test of all the soldiers' skills under pressure. High-stakes rescue, survival, and combat scenarios all rolled into one. But for some reason, it felt different this time. The stakes were higher, and the pressure to perform was heavier. The soldiers were split into teams and sent to different parts of the training field, each given specific roles and objectives. For most, it was just another drill. They'd done it countless times. But Lily knew better. The sweat on the back of her neck told her that something about today would be different. The energy on base had shifted in the past few weeks, and it wasn't just because of the recent exercise with Lawson. It was the way the officers acted, how they looked at her when they thought she wasn't paying attention. The challenge was set in motion, and as the clock ticked down, Lily's team was assigned to a critical extraction mission. They were to locate and extract high-value individuals who had been captured by the enemy in a mock conflict. The mission would be long, dangerous, and fraught with simulated hazards. The air was tense as the soldiers prepared for what lay ahead. But there was a problem. Lieutenant Jensen, the same officer who had mocked Lily days before, was leading the operation. Despite his cocky attitude and brash behavior, he was a skilled tactician, no doubt. But Lily had noticed something strange about his approach. While most of the team focused on their roles, Jensen seemed distracted. This plan was overly complicated, with too many moving parts and unclear contingencies. The other soldiers followed his orders without question, but it didn't sit right with Lily. As they moved deeper into the mock battlefield, things started to unravel. It began with a small mistake, a misstep that led to a delayed communication with the extraction team. And then it spiraled. The simulated enemy ambush came out of nowhere. Shots rang out from every direction. The soldiers scrambled, trying to regroup and defend themselves. But Jensen was losing control, barking orders that made no sense in the chaos. The team was scattered, and the confusion spread like wildfire. Lily, ever the calm presence, tried to maintain some semblance of order. She called out orders, trying to consolidate the troops, but it was too late. There was too much noise, too much panic. And then, as if the universe was pushing her to the edge, a sudden explosion, an unexpected simulation gone wrong, knocked Lily to the ground. She barely caught her breath before the sound of footsteps approached. It was Private Harris, a young soldier on her team, badly injured from the blast. Blood poured from a wound in his leg, and he was unconscious, slumped in the dirt. Lily's heart raced. They were miles away from base camp, surrounded by enemy fire, and she was the only one close enough to help. The soldiers around her hesitated. Jensen was nowhere to be seen. They looked to her, unsure whether to follow her lead or wait for further instructions. There was no time for instructions. There was only action. Without thinking, Lily moved into autopilot mode. She grabbed Harris, using every ounce of strength to drag him behind cover, all while keeping an eye on the hostile surroundings. Her mind raced. Every training exercise she had ever done, every textbook lesson, Every piece of advice her instructors had given her, it all came rushing back. But this wasn't just another drill. It wasn't a controlled environment anymore. This was real life, with the weight of a soldier's life hanging in the balance. She couldn't afford to be wrong. Lily applied the emergency first aid measures she had drilled so many times, but the wound was deep. She needed more. It was a situation where the team would have to extract him or risk losing him for good. But the orders? There were none. The soldiers around her waited for Jensen to give a signal, but he was nowhere to be found. It was up to her. With the seconds ticking down, Lily made the call. She couldn't wait. She slapped a tourniquet around Harris's leg, stopping the bleeding. There was no time to carry him back to base safely. She had to act fast, just as she had done in the past. She relied on instinct, cutting through the noise, moving forward despite the odds stacked against her. She had been underestimated before, but today, the weight of her duty pushed her to act in a way that no one had expected. "We move now," she barked at the nearby soldiers, snapping them into action. With one hand gripping Harris, she led them forward. The enemy fire continued, the sound of explosions and gunshots ringing in the air, but Lily pushed through. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the extraction point. Lily had done what no one else thought was possible. She had kept Harris alive. And yet, when the mission ended, when the dust settled, it was clear that no one had truly seen what had happened. They were focused on the other elements of the drill, the lost targets, the failures of their tactical plans. But Lily? She had done the impossible. She hadn't waited for orders. She had led her team in a way that no one had anticipated, and she had kept a fellow soldier alive when all odds were against them. Her actions went largely unnoticed by the higher-ups, but as the soldiers around her gathered to debrief, it was clear that there was a shift. The same soldiers who had once looked at her as just a medic now saw her for what she truly was. Not just a medic, a leader. But Lily, in her quiet way, didn't seek their admiration. She was already focused on the next task ahead, because for her, the mission was always the priority, not the recognition. The world had a funny way of shifting its gaze when the stakes were high. A few days after the botched operation, Sergeant Lily Reynolds didn't expect things to change. In fact, she wasn't even sure she wanted them to. There was always a risk with recognition, a temptation to let the pressure of being seen affect your judgment. But the next mission, the real test, would push her to a place where everything she had learned, every ounce of knowledge, every second of practice, would be thrown into chaos. This mission wasn't a drill. It wasn't simulated. This was as real as it could get, and no amount of preparation could prepare her for what came next. It was early morning when the call came through. The mission was simple, a high-risk extraction operation. An Allied officer had gone missing during an operation in hostile territory, and it was up to Lily's team to retrieve them. The briefing was quick, the stakes higher than ever before. If they didn't act fast, the officer would either be captured or killed, and their chances of survival would plummet with each passing hour. Lily didn't hesitate. She geared up, slipped on her gloves, and focused on the task at hand. She knew the risks, she knew the importance of this mission, but more than that, she understood the one thing no one else seemed to grasp. This wasn't about the medals, the titles, or the praise. This was about saving a life, doing what needed to be done. The rest was secondary. Her team set out, but it wasn't long before they encountered trouble. The enemy was closer than expected. They were no longer in the clear. They were in hostile territory, surrounded by danger on all sides. The plan, which had been simple on paper, quickly began to fall apart as unexpected threats popped up. A sniper's bullet ricocheted near them, and the team scattered, trying to regroup. And then, chaos. The team leader, Captain Ellis, was hit. His leg was torn open by shrapnel from a blast, and he collapsed in agony. The rest of the team went into a panic, unsure of what to do. The enemy fire was too heavy. No one could reach Ellis in time. That's when Lily did what no one else thought to do. She didn't wait for orders. She didn't wait for anyone to take the lead. She ran straight toward the chaos, assessing the situation in an instant. "Get to cover. I'll handle Ellis," she shouted over the comms. Her voice was calm, too calm for someone in the middle of a battlefield. The others hesitated, torn between the responsibility of their mission and the need to keep themselves safe. But Lily didn't have time for hesitation. She had trained for this. She had worked under fire before, seen injuries that would have broken others. This was what she did. She reached Ellis, who was groaning in pain, his face pale as he clutched his leg. She quickly assessed the damage. It was bad, but it wasn't fatal. With a combination of painkillers and quick thinking, she stabilized him enough to get him moving. But that's when the unthinkable happened. An enemy squad spotted them. The fire grew more intense, and the team was now in a full-blown firefight. The mission was slipping away, and the officer they were trying to rescue was still miles away. They couldn't stay put. Ellis needed urgent evacuation, and time was running out. Lily's mind worked quickly, calculating the risks, the chances of survival, and the best course of action. She had to keep Ellis alive long enough to get to the extraction point. There was no option but forward. "We move now," Lily commanded, her voice sharp, every word precise. She couldn't afford for anyone to question her. She'd done her job. Now, she needed everyone else to do theirs. With Ellis in tow, Lily led her team through the firestorm. The others followed, though hesitant at first. They were unsure if it was the right call, but they trusted her. They had seen what she could do, and with every passing second, they began to believe in her ability to get them through this. But the danger wasn't over. As they neared the extraction point, another problem emerged. The extraction team was delayed. A sudden storm had made the helicopter's landing difficult. The enemy was closing in. The ground was unstable. The seconds were slipping away. Lily didn't let the panic seep in. She ordered the soldiers to set up a defensive position. But the enemy had caught up with them faster than they anticipated. The gunfire intensified. Her team was surrounded. Lily looked to her left and right, counting the seconds. This was it, the moment that would define everything. She had no choice but to make a call that could cost them their lives. But it was the only way. "Cover me," she shouted, her voice louder than the chaos around them. Before anyone could react, Lily sprinted towards the clearing where she knew the extraction helicopter would be landing. With her medic bag slung across her shoulder and her mind focused on the mission, she ran headfirst into the danger, dodging bullets and debris. Behind her, the team kept the enemy occupied, providing covering fire as best as they could. The helicopter was finally in sight, its blades chopping the air as it descended. But it wasn't landing on the landing pad. There wasn't enough time. It had to be on the move, and it was risky. Lily reached the helicopter, waving the pilot down as she helped the extraction team load Ellis on board. But just as they were about to lift off, a bullet found its way to her side. The impact was sharp, but not enough to take her down. She barely felt it. All she could think about was Ellis. All she could think about was getting him to safety. With her last ounce of strength, Lily climbed aboard, and the helicopter shot into the sky, leaving the battlefield behind. It wasn't until they were safely out of the danger zone, the thrum of the helicopter blades a steady beat beneath them, that Lily finally allowed herself to breathe. She had done it. She had done what no one else could. She had saved them all: Ellis, the team, and the mission. The soldiers around her were silent. The adrenaline was still coursing through their veins, and they were all too stunned to speak. They had seen her go from just a medic to the one who had pulled them out of a situation that would have been their end. And in the quiet that followed, they knew. They knew exactly what Lily was. More than just a medic. She was their savior,